Welcome to Jan-Piet's Church today. This is surprisingly, surprise, not a sneak preview for our Brahms Dvorak Festival, completely against my expectations. I thought we'd have some more Brahms Dvorak for you because after all, I'm trying to promote on an ongoing basis our little festival, big festival, 2 days of Brahms Dvorak here in Armadale at United Church, mostly on November 17th, 18th. And if you don't know about this, well, you'll soon know more about it because I think we have something in the newspaper this week. Or else you can always look up my website, jpknife.com, where the whole program is available. It may be good if you want to come to our wonderful little event called Waltzing Johannes. That's all the waltzes from Opus 39 played on one piano duet and 2 pianos duet. If you want to come to that event, send us an email to the festival email address, armadale.festival@gmail, to reserve your seat for the event, because seats are for that event incredibly limited. It's not here, but at 141 Erskine Road, and it's a private house with very limited space. So by all means, if you want to come to that event, go online and send us an email to the festival email address. If you cannot find that address, you can always send one to my address and I'll pass it on. But that may be a good thing to do. In general, please spread the word about the festival. Bring your friends, relatives, enemies for my part, bring them all. We would like to have a full church, a full house, as much as possible. Now, today is not a sneak preview for the Brahms Dvorak Festival. So the question is, what are we playing today? It's a very funny piece. Strange, weird, unusual, and also in its own way very beautiful. And in its own strange way, it could be touching, but in very, very different ways than Brahms or Dvorak might have been. And I can't help loving this composer. And we talked the other day with our committee for the Brahms Dvorak Festival about what we might do next. If or when we do another festival, maybe next May or June or something here in Armadale, what might it be about? And one idea came up, which I didn't think was terribly likely to pass. But if that happens, then I think this piece will probably return in that festival. But in any event, about the theme for our next festival, we'll ask you to give your opinion after the Brahms Dvorak Festival. You can send us an email or just talk to us, and you can share your opinion about it all with us. Anyway, here is this piece for today, and you'll see it's a piece for violin and piano, but the violin starts alone. And I'm going to ask our violinist here, Jody Ostenfeld, to play a little bit from the beginning of the piece. And I'll ask you what you think this piece might be. I mean, yeah, get the idea? What could that possibly be?
A guitar.
It's a guitar, right? Yeah. Or something like it, right? A guitar or a banjo or something.
The ukulele.
Or a lute, a ukulele. A lute, maybe? It could be, I suppose, it could almost be the vocal concerto for lute and orchestra or something. Or telemann. Something like that, right? Yeah. Or a guitar piece, yes.
Could be pizzicato violin.
It could be pizzicato violin. Yeah. Looks like a violin, doesn't it? Yeah. Pizzicato violin. Or pizzicato viola, almost. If you transpose it down a little bit. Okay, well, why don't you play a little bit more? Don't you think? Like, there's all these pizzicato chords, like a guitar or a ukulele or a banjo or a lute or something, but then there's these funny sort of accents, you know what I mean? Like, this violinist is somewhat saying, well, listen to me, or listen to this particular chord, or that chord, or I'm playing these chords all day and I'm getting sick and tired of playing these darn chords all the time. I cannot help hearing it a little bit that way. Another chord. Damn it. You know, that sort of thing. You know what I'm wrong now? After 4 bars, she starts all over again with that same chord, but now with more accents. And for me, it's a bit like she's almost saying like, hello, is anybody going to play along or what? Am I supposed to play these chords forever and ever, hallelujah, or is somebody going to join in? You hear that way or not? I mean, it's the same chord over and over again, basically with a few different chords, and then again that same chord, but it's a bit louder. Is somebody going to play or not? Maybe you think, well, that's the wrong note, obviously. But it's not. But it sounds completely wrong, right? Yeah, I played the notes that would have been right, maybe, in this context. Let me play what fine. That would have been okay, right? One more time, same thing. This composer says, yeah, that would be a little bit too easy. I'm not going to do that. So the violin is playing, let's face it, quite obviously in this key, right? I mean, you know, quite obviously. And the piano says, no, I'm going to play a different key. And it's funny, who is the boss? Who sounds stronger? Who do you think is right? The violin is right or the piano is right? Yeah. Piano. Yeah, but why does it sound that way is the question.
It's a long chord.
Yes, exactly right. Thank you so much. I think it's because the notes in the piano are held. And no matter how often she plays that chord, has played it and plays it again, these short notes don't win over that long note from the piano. But maybe she could still win. Not play by 5 1 more time. But the piano says, you don't have a chance. You understand? Like, with this, the piano says, over and out, forget it. Right? And what I think we worked on this morning, and I said, but it's very interesting, the moment that the piano says, and this is really the key, she desperately tries to convince me of the opposite. Can you hear that? Because at that moment that I play, she has this big extra chord. No, I'm right! But it's a lost game. You do 5 more times? Because the piano says, okay. But then the piano plays the rest of his left hand and his right hand exactly the chords he's been playing all the time. But these 2 notes are the boss. Not only because they are long, but also, very importantly, organists who know it. What's the most important part of any working piece? There's an organist. Your right hand, or your left hand, or something else?
Pedal.
The pedals are the boss, aren't they? In the end of the day? Yeah. Because they're the lowest part. Don't ever tell any soprano this. But in a choir, right? Who sings in a choir? Or has sung in a choir sometimes? Or has conducted choirs? Yeah. Not the same thing. Who's the most important group in a choir? Really? The basses are, yes. But you don't want to tell sopranos this. And of course, it's not quite fair. They all have their importance. The altos help the sopranos, and the tenors, maybe also, I don't know, if you're lucky. But the basses, in a way, that's where the music really is, right? The sopranos make it sound pretty, very important, but the music is the bass line. And that's here too. And that's why this chord is the boss. And it doesn't matter what I do with the rest of my. So, her original key becomes, in a way, just a color. This chord is the boss, and this is just a little bit of funny color. So it turned out that you were fooled into thinking that she was playing in our home key for this piece, but she wasn't at all. Or maybe for a moment she was, but the piano changes it. The composer of this piece, whom I'm not going to give away yet, said that in composing this violin sonata, he did not at all try to bring the violin and the piano together. Strange thing to say, but this composer said, look, they're obviously 2 completely different instruments. I'm not even going to try to make them sound good together. What I'm going to do is each has their own world, and they're playing together, but they have their own personality. We're not going to try to make it one piece with the 2 instruments melting, as it were, but the 2 have a conversation. And sometimes when working on this sonata and this movement, sometimes I'm inclined to think that the composer was sort of not quite serious, because sometimes you do think, they so become almost one. But at other times I think the composer is really right. And here, in the beginning, I think it's a very nice example of how they do not come together. Her key and his key, and he wins, but she doesn't like this at all. Shall we start bumping up from the very beginning, and then we play a bit more, and then you'll find out how funny this piece really is. that would make it funny, right? That means it's not really serious. Although, of course, parodies can be serious in their own right? But what do people think? Do you think it's serious? Is this composer being serious? Or is it being tongue-in-cheek, sort of funny?
It would almost be like a puppetry background.
Yeah. What sort of piece is it?
Jazz.
Yeah, it's jazzy sort of piece, yeah. Jazz is a difficult term, but I think the composer would have agreed with it's some kind of jazz, but it's even a very specific, the composer says, a very specific type of piece within the big genre that's called jazz, a very specific sort of thing. Is the violin happy, you think? The violin as a person in a piece. Is the violin happy singing? It's sort of sad, right? Sort of almost a little bit crying, a little bit sad. How do you know this?
It sounds like the blues, but it's also...
It's a blues, absolutely.
But,
the violin has the blues.
But there's humour in it as well. I don't think it's intended to be.
No, I think this composer you can never, almost never take it completely seriously. And even if you do, you're not completely sure if you should or should not. But I do think there is humour in this piece, absolutely. But it's also, the composer I think is also trying to write a genuine blues. And the violin of course is singing the blues. And sad tears, crying, what for? Well, just because of life. Of it all, right? And but what most of all makes you think that, in a technical sense, what is the violin doing that's so unusual? It is sliding up and down all the time. And I think, I cannot imagine how this composer would not have a little laugh with writing those almost naughty sort of glissandos, right, on the violin. If you went to a violin lesson and you played any other piece of music with this sort of glissandos, the teacher would say, "Whoa, when did you study? Or you couldn't be joking. That's all very bad." Interestingly, these sort of glissandos were not considered nearly as bad 100 years ago, or even 80 years ago. They were much more part of playing. But even so, when the composer writes them in very carefully in this piece, he takes it to a little bit of an extreme. And it's very much, I think, the violin is crying her heart out, or his heart out. And yes, it's absolutely a blues. The violin is singing the blues. When do you think this piece was written and where? Does anybody know the piece except professionals? Good.
20s.
No, the 20s is very, very good. Yes, and where?
Sounds like Orleans.
Yeah, New Orleans, because of the blues, right? Can you think of any New Orleans composer for violin and piano?
Not off the top of my head.
The answer is, forget about it. But there was one country in particular in Europe where jazz and blues early on was incredibly welcomed by very fine, established, classical, if that's a good word, composers. They loved jazz. And they loved it so much that they wanted to try to do it themselves. One famous composer like that is Darius Milhaud. Very jazzy stuff from time to time. He later went to America a lot. Another composer early on who did that a little bit was Debussy. Piano piece, cakewalk, sort of ragtime sort of piece. Jazzy enough in its own right, not really, but sort of. And do we know of another French composer who would qualify for doing this?
Ravel?
Of course. This is the second movement from the violin sonata by Maurice Ravel. And it is not only a blues, it's even called a blues. That's how proud Ravel was of this. He was gonna write a real blues in the late 20s. And Ravel had been to America and had visited jazz clubs, not, I don't think, in New Orleans, but in New York. And he loved it. Personally, what I think is Ravel loved jazz, was fascinated by it, wanted to do it, and also couldn't. But he could fake it in a way. In a way, what he does, he takes all the ingredients of jazz and blues and he puts them in his big kettle and he stirs them up with his own French 20th century idiom and with all the new stuff that he has recently learned from colleagues and worked out himself, including playing in two keys at the same time. Right? That's sort of, but one key is the boss, but it sort of is in two keys. All that sort of stuff Ravel puts together, and there is his blues. Is it a real New Orleans blues? Of course not. We listened to some real blues a while ago, and it's nothing compared with, of course not, because Ravel had too much sophistication and was too French to do a real original hardcore New Orleans, dare I say this, bravo genre in classical music. Of course he couldn't do that. But I think he goes as close to it in this movement as any classical French composer in the 1920s possibly could have. And I think Ravel must have loved doing this. And like always, Ravel listened so closely to the original blues and to the instruments playing. What instrument is really playing? Get that all up. Okay, so now we have my key, right? I'm the boss. I mean, surely this is not really violin. What instrument does Ravel want you to hear?
Singer.
Mouthful.
A singer, maybe, a mouth organ, maybe a singer. Yes, I think that's valid. I cannot help hear a very high clarinet. Or I don't know. You like soprano saxophone? Yeah, it's the most out of tune instrument ever developed. But it's the coolest thing, right? So sort of gelling out in that higher range. I think it's that sort of thing. And when we worked a little bit on this lately, I've been trying to encourage violinists to go a little bit further. But I think singing, yes, absolutely, it's also very, very much a singer. We play the beginning of time to go on. this is one moment where anybody with a little bit of musical knowledge would say, yeah, but that's not a real blues. You're not going to tell me that these two New Orleans jazz musicians with, probably very little formal training are doing this funny sort of thing. But Ravel doing this funny sort of thing, oh yes, absolutely. Ravel is showing off that he can do more than just writing a blues. Ravel is showing off that he also has brains and he has learned his music theory textbooks, right? Because what's happening here, did you hear? It's very, very, very funny. It's a very unusual one, but it absolutely is one. You want to play? Oh yeah. I mean, that's to begin with very nice. That's like pizzicato, right? It's a bit like electric guitar solo, I think. And you hear beep, 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 beep. And then later on, she does a marvelous thing, beep, pop, pop, like one note, but you shift up with your finger so the note plays around a little bit. It's like what electric guitarists do all the time, right? You want to play it? Beep, pop, pop. Exactly right. It's cool, right? Yes?
It's the rite of spring.
Rite of spring is a little bit that, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's of course that sort of time. I'm not sure if Ravel liked the rite of spring. He may have actually.
It's almost a direct quote.
What's that?
It's almost a direct quote.
Yeah, almost a direct quote. You're right. Yeah. But besides that tune being so cool, what does Ravel do? Pizzicato violin and this piano and middle range, a completely different instrument in the band, right? I personally think this is hilarious. It could never have happened in New Orleans or even in the bars in Harlem. But Ravel took all that stuff and did something with it.
When did Gershwin publish Fascinating Rhythm?
Very good point, I don't know.
Because the tunes.
Ravel and Gershwin, of course, knew each other.
Yeah.
Famous story. Gershwin applied to study with Ravel. Right? Gershwin, of course, the famous, as it were, jazz composer, right? Sort of, as it were. And Ravel said, no, why not? I want to study with you. And finally Ravel says, but look at this way. Why would you want to be a second Ravel if you can be the first Gershwin? Nice, right? And then with Ravel, but Ravel, that was a cop-out. Ravel didn't sort of feel like it. But Ravel recommended him to Gershwin, to another very great French teacher. But it never happened. Gershwin became the first Gershwin, not the second Ravel or the second Nadia Boulanger. We do het kennen momentan, we move on. A lot of cool things, don't you think? That ending is the end of fantastic, is that blue note. And when we talk about it, I always try to get Jodie here to play that blue note as low as she does. Should we do it one more time? Right, because that seventh, which is something extremely dissonant in our system. I mean, verbally. But then, without going into detail of that, that's because that seventh is so terribly out of tune on the piano. The violin, which is not bound by the terrible limitations, ridiculous instrument it is, of only 12 notes in every octave, but has, an unlimited number of notes, right, mathematically speaking, can twist that seventh lower or higher, whatever like. And I think that seventh should be as low as she possibly dares, because, without going into detail, in nature, that seventh is really low. And if you can approach that, so much the better. What I think is also cool is the ending, where the beginning comes back. Now, without the banjo, just that melody. And now that melody is divided over the violin and the piano. And I think if ever there was a moment where they don't come together, it's there. They play the same notes, but of course the sounds are completely different. By the 1920s, the violin and the piano had grown more apart than ever before. In 1780, when Mozart writes a violin sonata for his type of little piano and his type of violin, if you play it even today on that sort of instruments, you say, gee, the piano and the violin go nicely together. Beethoven, violin sonata, piano trio, with that sort of instruments of the time, you say, gee, it's almost like three-string instruments. And I think even Brahms thinks of the piano a little bit that way. But by the time Ravel comes along, you can no longer think of it that way. They're completely different instruments, different aesthetics, different worlds. And Ravel says, well, you know what? We may as well enjoy it. One color and the other color, the same music, but so different. Here's number 12. The piano tries to also copy the violin's slide. Oh, ooh. But of course the piano cannot really do that. Yeah, well, that sort of stuff, and, that sort of thing, but not really. But here's what Ravel does. He said, well, we can sort of try a little bit. So I have to hit an extra note, and hopefully, if you let your fancy work, it sounds a little bit like, but not nearly as good as the violin can do. So I think it's very beautiful, I personally think, how Ravel juxtaposes, if you want a nice Latin word, these two instruments. He puts them next to each other. They don't really come together. Is there maybe a biographical reason in Ravel's life for this? Well, I leave that to you for now. But I can give away that Ravel, of course, never married. The sonata, on the other hand, was written for a violinist woman friend. And Armin Ornstein, my former colleague at Queen's College CUNY, which I think is greatly suffering their music building from that woman Sandy at the moment. Armin Ornstein wrote in his book about Ravel, he said, well, if Ravel would have married, then he might have married that woman, for whom he wrote the violin sonata. And sadly, the woman never played the violin sonata, because by the time it was written, she had such arthritic trouble that she couldn't play anymore. One of the great dramas of music history. A good friend writes a wonderful sonata for a violinist friend, and by the time the dark piece is written, she cannot play it anymore. What a terrible drama that must have been for the two of them, I think. For a long time, the sonata by Ravel was not terribly popular at all. I like reading old books about 20th century composers, you know, when they were almost still alive, or they had been dead only for 10, 20 years. And there's a few such books from the 30s, 40s, 50s about Ravel. And the Violin Sonata, yeah, interesting, but not so good. There's a few nice moments, and he tries this, he tries that, but it's not a great piece. And with a bit more distance, now after 100 years almost, 80 years, you say, well, I don't get this at all. It's to me a total masterpiece. Also technically, I read a little bit about form and analysis of the sonata, and then I looked at it myself, and I said, boy, I cannot believe that music theorists and musicologists seem to miss out on these obvious things here and there. Seems to me that a lot is still to be written about in this sonata, and I have a feeling that this sonata may still be on the rise in terms of appreciation in music history. Come back in 100 years, and it may be bigger than, well, I don't know. Bigger than some composers that we do a lot of these days. Gosh. Do you have 5 minutes? You will play the whole thing once? Because it's the coolest thing, right? Oh, I said one more thing before we do it. What I love is this bit for piano alone. But in a way, if you listen closely, you hear the bass drum, I think. But it's not there. But it is. Anything? But he doesn't write it. But you can somehow hear it in a way. Don't you think? I think that's marvelous. That's such a Ravelian sort of thing to do, to imply that bass drum without writing. Marvelous. I have such admiration for Ravel's craftsmanship and for his playful sense of humor. I think it's marvelous. I'm so pleased that we're doing this piece. We will not be playing it, of course, in our Brahms Worship Festival, but who knows, maybe we'll do a French music festival next year, and if that is the case, then I hope that we'll be playing this piece again. We play the whole movement for you. This is the blues, second movement, from the Violin Sonata, written by Ravel in the mid-1920s. So long ago, and also so near, almost, you know. My parents were born not that much later. Maybe some of you were born almost at the same time as this sonata, I don't quite know. Ravel's Blues, Jody Wostenfeld violin. That was my choice for this week. Next week there will be another choice. I have a feeling it may be Brahms or Dvorak. And even not, we'll have our Brahms Dvorak Festival the weekend after that. The weekend after this one will be the 17th and 18th of November, our Brahms Dvorak Festival here in Armadale. Please tell all your friends and bring them here. Thank you so much.